My sister showed up at my condo on a Thursday night after being gone for almost 10 years. I knew it was her before she said anything. She looked older, obviously, and her hair was shorter. But there are some faces your brain recognizes before the rest of you catches up. She stared at me for maybe 2 seconds and then threw her arms around me. I hugged her back. That part still bothers me a little because it was automatic. Like my body remembered having a sister, even though the rest of my life had been built around the fact that I didn't anymore. Then she pulled back and said, "Look at you." I asked how she'd gotten my address. Her face changed immediately. Not fear exactly. More like she'd hoped we'd get further into the reunion before I started asking practical questions. She said someone had helped her find me, but she'd promised not to tell me who. That was when I asked the more obvious question. "Why didn't you call?" She had my phone number too. She admitted that. She said she thought I'd hang up. I said, "I might have." For context, I'm 31 now. My sister Rachel is 36. When I was 18, Rachel ran off with her boyfriend Derek and married him without telling anyone. Our parents hated the relationship. We're from an Indian American family outside Columbus, and my parents had a long list of reasons they didn't like Derek. Some were cultural, which I thought was ridiculous even at 18. Some were actually pretty reasonable. He was 8 years older than Rachel, had trouble keeping jobs, and seemed to enjoy turning every disagreement into a test of whether she loved him enough. Still, I wasn't on my parents' side. I told Rachel that at the time. I remember sitting on the hood of her old Civic in our driveway one night and telling her that if she wanted to marry him, she was an adult. I didn't think Mom and Dad got to decide that for her. A week later, she was gone. She left a note. She blocked my parents. Then she blocked me. That was the part I'd never understood. I called her over and over. I emailed her. I messaged 2 of her friends from college. I even contacted the restaurant where she'd been working and found out she'd quit. One friend eventually told me Rachel was safe and didn't want anybody in the family knowing where she was. I said, "Even me?" Her friend got quiet. Then she said Rachel had been very clear. Nobody. So when Rachel stood in my hallway almost 10 years later, telling me that her problem had never been with me, I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. It was just the least dramatic reaction available. I said, "You blocked me too." She looked down and said she knew. Then she started crying. She told me she'd thought about me constantly. She said she hated how she'd handled things. She said she had 2 kids now, a daughter named Lily who was 8, and a son named Noah who was 6. Then she said she and Derek had divorced. I wish I could say that didn't affect how I reacted. But it did. Something about hearing that made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. For years, whenever I thought about Rachel at all, I'd told myself at least she'd gotten the life she'd wanted. Maybe she'd disappeared because she was happy and protecting that happiness from our parents. It wasn't a great explanation, but it was one I could live with. Now she was standing there, divorced, telling me she wanted her little brother back. I asked when she'd gotten divorced. "Last year." "And that's why you're here?" She shook her head quickly. "No. God, no." I waited. She didn't give me a better answer. She asked if she could come inside. I said I didn't think that was a good idea. She looked genuinely shocked. Then she said, "I'm your sister." I told her that biologically, sure. That landed harder than I intended. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat. I said we'd already gone through losing her once. My parents had spent years wondering if she was alive, sick, broke, trapped somewhere, or simply happy without us. I spent my freshman year of college calling home 3 or 4 times a week, because my mother sounded like she might fall apart if I didn't. Eventually, we stopped saying Rachel's name. Not because anybody made a rule. It just hurt less. My dad removed her graduation picture from the hallway after about 3 years. My mom kept hers in a drawer. I only know that because I saw it once while looking for batteries. Life moved on. I finished school. I moved to Cincinnati for work. I met my girlfriend Megan. I bought a small condo. My parents got older. Dad had knee surgery. Mom started volunteering at the library. Rachel became something that had happened to our family. Now she wanted to get lunch. I told her I didn't know her anymore. She said, "You could." I said, "I don't know if I want to." She started crying again, but didn't argue. Before leaving, she wrote her number and address on the back of an old grocery receipt from her purse. She lived 17 minutes away from me. That detail somehow felt stranger than everything else. For almost a decade, I'd pictured her living somewhere completely removed from my life. Arizona, California, maybe another country. Instead, she'd apparently been buying groceries at the same Kroger locations and sitting in the same highway traffic. After she left, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the receipt. Megan came over around 9. I told her what happened. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Are you going to call her?" I said no. About 20 minutes later, I said maybe. Before Megan went home, she told me something I didn't particularly want to hear. "You don't have to forgive her. But if you're curious, you're allowed to be curious." I slept badly. The next morning, there was a text from Rachel. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but Lily and Noah know they have an uncle. They'd really like to meet you." I stared at it through most of my first work meeting. At lunchtime, I finally answered. "Saturday. 1 hour." She replied before I'd even put my phone down. "Thank you." I assumed meeting her kids would either make everything clearer or convince me this had been a mistake. It did neither. Rachel lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a newer complex near Mason. When she opened the door Saturday, both kids were standing behind her, like she'd lined them up. Lily looked exactly like Rachel had at that age. That hit me harder than seeing Rachel herself. Noah was wearing a Bengals shirt and holding a plastic dinosaur. Rachel crouched beside them. "This is Uncle Matt." Nobody spoke for a second. Then Noah looked at me and said, "Mom said you're her little brother." And I said, "Unfortunately." Rachel laughed. I hadn't heard that laugh in 10 years. That was probably the first moment I realized I wasn't going to be able to treat her like a complete stranger, no matter how much I wanted things to be that simple. The kids made it worse, or better. I'm still not sure. We played a card game at the kitchen table. Lily showed me a school project about Ohio history. Noah asked if I'd ever been to an NFL game and then spent 10 minutes explaining why the Bengals' offensive line was ruining his life. He was 6, so I respected the commitment. Rachel mostly watched us. At one point, she caught my eye and smiled. I looked away. Later, after the kids went to their room, she asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. Then I asked what had happened. Not with the divorce. With us? She leaned against the kitchen counter and said that when she left, everything had felt like war. Dad had told her that if she walked out with Derek, she shouldn't bother coming back. I remembered that. It had been ugly. My mother was crying. Rachel was screaming. Dad was furious. Derek was sitting in his truck at the curb. But Rachel left out another part. Our father had also spent months asking her to slow down. He offered to pay for an apartment if she wanted to move out, but wasn't ready to marry Derek. Mom asked Rachel to go to counseling with her. He reminded Rachel of that. She said, "I know." Then she went quiet. I asked why she'd blocked me. She rubbed the side of her coffee mug. Derek thought you'd eventually tell them where we were. There it was. The first answer that actually made sense. Did you think that? I didn't know. You could have asked. I was 26 and convinced everybody was against me. You were 26, not 16. She nodded. I expected her to defend herself. She didn't. She said, "You're right." And that took some of the fight out of me. Then she told me about the marriage. At first, she said, it was good. They moved to a smaller town near Dayton, where Derek had friends. He worked in commercial flooring. Rachel found an office job. Lily was born about a year later. Noah came 2 years after that. Rachel said she'd tried sending news about both births through an old family friend named Priya. We never heard anything. I asked if she'd ever followed up. She admitted she hadn't. So, you sent one message through one person and figured that covered 8 years? She looked embarrassed. No, because that's what it sounds like. I know. She kept saying that. I know. It started irritating me. Then she told me that around 2020, Derek changed. I won't get into every detail because some of it belongs to her. But the short version is that he became controlling. He monitored money. He read her messages. He'd record arguments on his phone and play pieces of them back later to prove she'd said things she didn't remember saying. He became especially hard on Noah. Rachel didn't call it abuse at first. She said bad and toxic and unstable. I was the one who finally said, "Rachel, that sounds abusive." She stared into her coffee. Then she nodded. A neighbor named Claire eventually helped her contact an attorney and find a better job. Rachel left with the kids during one of Derek's work trips. The divorce took almost a year. I asked the question that had been bothering me since Thursday. Why didn't you call us then? Her answer surprised me. Pride. She said it quietly. Then she added, and Mom and Dad. That part went differently. Rachel said she'd spent years believing our parents had made it impossible for her to come home. I said, you had my number. She said Derek had spent years convincing her that we'd all rejected her. I said, again, you blocked me. She got defensive then. Not loud, but sharp. You don't understand what it was like. No, I don't. You made sure I couldn't. That stopped the conversation. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she asked if I hated her. I told her no. That seemed to relieve her until I added, I don't trust you either. She cried. I felt bad, but I didn't take it back. Before I left, she asked if I wanted to come over again the next weekend. I said maybe. Then I remembered the other thing. Who gave you my address? Her entire posture changed. She asked me to please leave that alone. I said somebody giving out my home address wasn't a small thing. She insisted the person hadn't done it casually. She'd begged them. She'd promised she wasn't dangerous, wasn't trying to cause trouble, and would leave immediately if I told her to. Who? I promised. It was strange enough that I almost pushed harder. I didn't. Partly because I was tired. Partly because the kids came running out to say goodbye. Noah hugged me. Lily asked if I'd come to one of her soccer games. I told her I'd try. Rachel stood by the door looking like she was afraid to ask me anything else. I drove home angry at her. Then I realized I'd enjoyed the afternoon. Both things were true. Over the next month, I saw them 3 more times. Nothing dramatic happened. And somehow that became the problem. Rachel and I could still talk. We remembered the same dumb childhood stories. The summer our basement flooded. The time she convinced me that eating dog biscuits would make me run faster. The horrible family road trip to Virginia When Dad refused to admit he'd missed an exit for nearly an hour, for a few hours at a time, being around her felt normal. Then I'd leave, and remember that normal had disappeared for almost a decade, because she'd decided I wasn't worth one phone call. Thanksgiving made it worse. I spent the whole weekend at my parents' house. Rachel knew. She specifically asked me not to tell them we'd reconnected. I agreed at first because I figured her relationship with them wasn't mine to manage. But sitting across from my mother at dinner, while she complained about Dad putting too much pepper in the mashed potatoes, I kept thinking about the fact that her daughter lived less than 2 hours away. More importantly, she had grandchildren Mom didn't know. Technically, she knew they existed now because I'd told her years ago that I'd heard rumors Rachel had kids. But names? Birthdays? What they looked like? Nothing. My parents had learned to function around that hole. I was suddenly helping keep it there. The next week, Rachel and I went Christmas shopping at a mall. She asked how Mom and Dad were. I told her they were fine. Then I stopped walking. "You can't keep doing that." She looked confused. "Doing what?" "Asking me about them while telling me they can't know you exist." She immediately stiffened. "I'm not ready." "I understand that." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is you're making me part of it." She didn't answer. That was when I started wondering whether getting my sister back was going to cost me something I wasn't willing to pay. Christmas was the point where I stopped pretending this could stay separate. My parents host every year. Nothing fancy. Too much food. Cousins everywhere. Somebody's toddler getting into something they shouldn't. My uncle trying to control the TV even though nobody asked him to. This year, though, I noticed Rachel's absence more because she wasn't actually absent anymore. She was 35 minutes from my condo. She'd sent me a picture that morning of Lily and Noah opening presents. Meanwhile, my mother was sitting on the couch next to my aunt, watching my cousin's kids tear through wrapping paper. At one point, Mom asked if Megan and I had talked about having kids. I said, "Eventually." Then she smiled and said, "I'd like some grandchildren before I need a walker." She meant it as a joke. I felt like I'd swallowed a rock. Rachel already had two. After New Year's, I went to her apartment and told her I couldn't keep this secret indefinitely. I tried to be careful. I said I wasn't demanding a family reunion. I wasn't asking her to forgive anybody. I wasn't even asking her to see Mom and Dad. I just couldn't continue sitting in their house, knowing where their daughter and grandchildren were, while pretending I knew nothing. Rachel got angry almost immediately. She repeated Dad's line from 10 years ago. "If I leave, I'm dead to them." I said, "Dad said that while you were literally getting into a truck after Mom had been crying for 6 hours? He meant it." "No, Rachel." He was angry. "You don't know that. I lived there afterward." That quieted her. I told her Dad spent months checking an email address he thought she still used. Mom would answer unknown numbers because she thought one might be Rachel. For years, anytime somebody mentioned Dayton, my parents got weird because they knew she'd once lived somewhere in that area. They mourned you. Rachel folded her arms. They made their choice. I said, "You made one too." She stared at me. It was the first time since we'd reconnected that I saw something in her that reminded me of why arguments with her used to become impossible when we were younger. Rachel could admit to individual mistakes. Blocking me was wrong. Not contacting me was wrong. Staying with Derek too long had been wrong. But the larger story in her head still required her to be the person things had happened to. The second I suggested she had created some of the damage herself, she closed up. She accused our parents of leaving her trapped with Derek. I said, "They didn't even know where you lived." She said, "Because I knew I couldn't go back. You could have called me." She didn't answer. I pushed once more. You had 9 years. Her eyes filled. Then she said, "Why are you doing this?" That got me. Doing what? Punishing me. I told her I wasn't punishing her. I was refusing to lie for her. She said she hadn't asked me to lie. I pointed out that omission was still a choice. Then I said something I probably could have phrased better. I have a relationship with Mom and Dad that's been stable my entire life. You disappeared for 10 years. I'm not damaging the stable relationship to protect the one that already proved it can vanish, she cried. I regretted the wording immediately. Not the point. Just the wording. The kids were in the next room, so neither of us raised our voices. We eventually agreed to take some space. For the next 4 months, Rachel and I mostly texted. She'd send pictures. Noah missing his front tooth. Lily holding some ridiculous ribbon from a soccer tournament. A burned lasagna with the caption, "Still can't cook." Some things survive divorce, I'd respond. Sometimes we talk about work. I didn't see them in person. Then Noah's 7th birthday came around in May. Rachel asked if I'd come. I thought about refusing. I didn't. The party was small. A few kids from school, 2 moms Rachel knew, Claire from her old neighborhood, and me. Claire was interesting. Not because she did anything suspicious, because she knew who I was immediately. "You're Matt." I looked at Rachel. Rachel suddenly became very interested in cutting cake. Claire smiled and said she'd heard a lot about me. That stuck with me. Later, while the kids were outside, I asked Rachel how long she'd been talking about finding me. She said almost a year. That didn't line up with the story she'd originally given me. She'd made it sound like she'd decided to contact me after the divorce. Apparently, she'd been considering it long before the divorce was final. I asked why she'd waited. She said she was scared. Fair enough. Then I asked again who gave her my address. Same reaction. No. I laughed. "Rachel, at this point I'm more curious because you're being weird about it. I promised." "To who?" She shook her head. I let it go. Again, that evening, she asked how our parents were. I told her they were doing well. Then I caught myself. "No, actually I'm not doing this anymore." She looked annoyed. "Doing what?" "Giving you updates." She said I was being childish. I said, "You can't declare people too dangerous to know you're alive, and then ask me for their weekly health report." She got furious. "They declared me dead. Then dead people don't get updates." I admit that was petty. Effective, though. She walked into the kitchen. About 10 minutes later, she came back and said, "Fine." I assumed that meant the conversation was over. Instead, she said, "Tell them." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. She repeated it. "Tell them I'm here." I asked if she was sure. She said no. Then she gave this exhausted little laugh. "But you're right. This is stupid." We agreed I wouldn't tell my parents I'd known for months. That part was mostly my request. I knew it would hurt them unnecessarily. Rachel agreed. 2 nights later, I called my mother. I said Rachel had contacted me. Mom went completely silent. Then she asked, "Our Rachel?" Like I had another one. I said yes. I told her Rachel was divorced. I told her about Lily and Noah. My mother started crying so hard, I could barely understand her. Dad got on the phone and asked where she was. I said I couldn't give him her address. He asked if she was safe. I said yes. Then he asked the question that probably summed up the last 10 years better than anything. "Does she look okay?" I said she did. Rachel called them the next morning. The first conversation lasted 12 minutes. I know, because Rachel texted me immediately afterward. That was horrible. 5 minutes later, Mom texted me, Thank you. I had a bad feeling about the meeting before it even happened. I just didn't expect the reason. We met at a park halfway between my parents' house and Rachel's apartment. Rachel chose somewhere public because she said she didn't want to feel trapped. Mom and Dad arrived almost 20 minutes early. Rachel arrived 7 minutes late. I remember those details because the waiting was brutal. Mom kept pretending to check things in her purse. Dad walked around reading every historical marker near the parking lot, like he was preparing for an exam. Then Rachel's car pulled in. She got out alone. The kids were coming later with me because Rachel wanted the first part to be adults only. My mother made it about 6 steps before she started crying. Rachel did too. They met in the middle of the sidewalk and just held each other. Dad stood beside them with one hand on Rachel's shoulder. Nobody said anything useful for several minutes. It was messy and awkward and probably the most normal thing that had happened in our family in years. Then Dad hugged her. Rachel buried her face against his chest. He kept saying, "You're here." That was it. "You're here." I thought maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe people really could lose 10 years and still find their way back. Then the kids arrived. Mom nearly lost it again when she saw Lily. Dad immediately started asking Noah about baseball, even though Noah prefers football. Within half an hour, the kids were calling them Grandma and Grandpa because Rachel had apparently already prepared them for that possibility. For a while, things were almost embarrassingly nice. We ate lunch. Dad gave Lily $20 despite Rachel telling him not to. Mom had brought 2 bags of gifts because of course she had. Noah showed Dad how to use some game on his tablet. Eventually, Rachel asked if I could take the kids somewhere for a little while so she could talk privately with our parents. I took them to get milkshakes. We were gone maybe 40 minutes. When we came back, I knew immediately something had happened. Rachel was standing near the picnic table. Mom was sitting down crying. Dad had that expression he gets when he's trying very hard not to say something he's going to regret. Rachel said they were leaving. Lily complained because she hadn't finished showing Grandma something. Rachel told her to get in the car. I asked what happened. She said, "Ask them." Then she left. My dad waited until her car was gone. She says what happened with her husband is our fault. I looked at Mom. She was staring at the parking lot. Apparently Rachel had told them about Derek. More than she'd told me. The financial control, the recordings, the insults, the way he'd treated Noah. My parents were horrified. Mom apologized for things she'd said the night Rachel left. Dad did too. Then Rachel told them every year she'd stayed with Derek, after realizing what he was like was partly because they had made her believe she had no family to return to. Dad reminded her they'd begged her not to marry him. That was where it blew up. Mom apparently said, "We warned you." Not the greatest choice of words. Rachel heard it as proof that nothing had changed. Dad tried explaining that he wasn't blaming her for Derek's behavior. He was saying they hadn't abandoned her into that marriage. She had cut contact. Rachel said they had forced her hand. Then everyone started defending 10-year-old versions of themselves. There was no winning that argument. For the next couple months, contact continued, which surprised me. My parents went to Rachel's apartment. Rachel sometimes came to their house, but it wasn't exactly reconciliation. It was more like supervised access to the wreckage. Mom focused on the kids. Dad fixed a cabinet in Rachel's kitchen and pretended that counted as conversation. Rachel usually found some excuse to disappear into another room when they visited. At first, I thought that was ridiculous. Then I started understanding it a little. She wanted her parents back. She also wanted them to admit that everything she'd suffered after leaving was somehow the consequence of what they'd said that final night. They wanted their daughter back, They also wanted her to admit that she had chosen to disappear. Everybody wanted reunion without surrendering their version of history. That wasn't going to happen. The address mystery finally got solved too. Not because Rachel told me, Megan did. One night, we were eating takeout at my place when I mentioned that Rachel was bringing the kids to my parents' house again. Megan said, "At least giving her your address ended up being worth it." I stopped chewing. She froze. I said, "What?" She closed her eyes. Then she muttered something I won't repeat, because it was mostly profanity directed at herself. Megan had given Rachel my address. Apparently, Rachel found her through Instagram months before showing up. Megan and I weren't married, but we'd been together nearly 4 years, and there were enough pictures of us online for Rachel to figure out who she was. Rachel messaged her. At first, Megan ignored it. Rachel kept trying. Eventually, they spoke on the phone. Megan made Rachel verify details about me that a random person wouldn't know. My childhood nickname, the scar on my left hand, our grandmother's name. Then Rachel told her the whole story, or her version of it. Megan refused to give my address for weeks. Rachel kept asking. Finally, Megan agreed after Rachel promised she'd leave if I rejected her and wouldn't come back. I was angry. Probably angrier with Megan than I'd been with Rachel in months. You gave somebody my home address without asking me. She was your sister. She was a stranger. I know. No, you didn't. Megan didn't defend herself much. She apologized. She said she'd convinced herself she was helping me get something I secretly wanted. I asked why she hadn't just told me Rachel had contacted her. She said she was afraid I'd say no before I had the chance to actually see her. That was my decision. I know. There was that phrase again. For a few minutes, I honestly wondered whether knowing would change our relationship. Not because I thought Megan had malicious intentions. She didn't. But good intentions don't magically give you authority over somebody else's life. We spent a rough couple of weeks after that. We worked through it. I made it extremely clear that there would never be another situation where she decided what information somebody else deserved about me. She accepted that. Rachel, meanwhile, was furious that Megan told me. Which was almost funny. I reminded her I'd been asking for months. She said, "She promised." I said, "Apparently promises are serious now." Rachel actually laughed at that. Then she told me to go to hell. So, progress. It's been a little over a year since she first appeared at my door. Things aren't fixed. I'm not sure they ever will be. But they're different. Rachel and I see each other maybe twice a month. Sometimes the kids stay with me for an afternoon. Lily texts me about soccer. Noah sends me pictures of football cards and expects immediate expert analysis. My parents see them too. Mom keeps a drawer at their house full of things the kids might need. Dad bought 2 child-sized fishing poles, despite neither kid expressing any interest in fishing. Rachel still keeps some distance from them. Some visits go well. Some end with her leaving early. A few months ago, Dad finally apologized for telling her she was dead to him. No explanation attached. No, but you. He just said he shouldn't have said it. Rachel cried. Then she told him she was sorry she kept the kids away from them. That was probably the closest anybody has come to saying what needed to be said. I still don't completely trust her. I don't mean I think she'll disappear tomorrow. I mean, part of me expects relationships with Rachel to have an emergency exit built into them. Maybe that changes with time. Maybe it doesn't. I'm also not pretending the last decade was some misunderstanding we can clear up over dinner. I missed my sister's wedding. She missed my college graduation. My parents missed both pregnancies, both births, first words, first steps, kindergarten. Rachel missed Dad's surgery and Mom's 50th birthday. There isn't a version where we get those things back. The strangest part is that I've stopped feeling like we need to. A few weeks ago, Rachel and the kids came over on a Sunday. Noah and I watched the Bengals lose in a way that felt specifically designed to annoy him. Lily was at my kitchen table doing homework. Rachel was on my couch scrolling through her phone. Nothing important happened. At some point she got up, opened my refrigerator, and complained that I still bought the same terrible orange juice Dad used to buy when we were kids. I told her she had been gone 10 years, and apparently hadn't developed better taste. She threw a dish towel at me. For about 5 seconds, it felt exactly like being 16 again. Then it didn't, and that was okay. When they left, Rachel hugged me at the door. Not the desperate hug from the first night, just a normal one. She said, "See you next weekend?" We said, "Probably." She smiled because she knew that was a yes. I watched her walk toward the parking lot with the kids. A year earlier, I would have said my sister had died when I was 18. I don't think that anymore, but I don't think she simply came back either. The person who disappeared is gone. So is the kid who waited for her to call. What we have now is something new. And for the first time since she knocked on my door, I'm not trying to decide whether that makes everything okay. It doesn't. It just makes it real. I thought that Sunday at my condo was probably where this story ended. Not in some big dramatic way. Rachel was back in my life. My parents knew their grandchildren. Everybody had said at least part of what they needed to say. And nobody had thrown a plate at anybody. For our family, that qualified as progress. Then about 3 months later, my dad called me at work and asked if Rachel had said anything strange to me recently. That got my attention. I asked what he meant. He said Rachel had been bringing the kids over more often, usually on Sundays. Mom loved it. Dad did too, even though he'd somehow turned every visit into an excuse to take Noah to Home Depot. The problem was, Rachel had started leaving the kids there for longer stretches. At first it was normal stuff. An hour while she ran errands, then 3 hours because she had an appointment, then most of a Saturday because somebody at work called out. My parents didn't mind. Honestly, I think they would have taken the kids every weekend if Rachel let them. What bothered Dad was that Rachel had started talking like this arrangement was something they owed her. The previous weekend, Mom had already made plans with one of her friends when Rachel called, asking if the kids could stay over. Mom said she couldn't that night, but offered the next weekend. Rachel apparently got quiet and said, "Never mind. I should have known." That sentence was all it took. Mom canceled her plans. Dad wasn't happy about it. He asked me whether Rachel had been doing similar things with me. I thought about it. She had. I just hadn't noticed the pattern. A few weeks earlier, Rachel asked if I could pick Lily up from soccer because she had to work late. I did. Another time she asked me to watch Noah while she went to dinner with some coworkers. Also fine. Then she'd asked whether I could take both kids for a whole weekend because Derek wanted to switch custody days at the last minute. I'd said no because Megan and I already had plans. Rachel didn't argue. She just said, "Right, of course." At the time, I thought I was imagining the edge in her voice. Now I wasn't so sure. I told Dad not to turn this into another confrontation. He laughed. "I am learning. Fair enough." A week later, Rachel asked me to come over after the kids were asleep. I assumed it was about Mom and Dad. It wasn't. Derek was trying to modify their custody agreement. Nothing extreme. He wanted more weekends and a different holiday schedule. But Rachel was panicking. She had a folder on her kitchen table with printed emails, texts, school schedules, and notes from her attorney. It looked like she was preparing for a congressional hearing. I sat down and started looking through it. Most of the messages from Derek were surprisingly normal. Cold, but normal. Can we switch weekends? Noah left his jacket here. Please send his school tablet. Things like that. I asked what specifically she was worried about. Rachel said, "He's trying to build a case." "For what?" "That I'm unstable." I looked at her. "Did your lawyer say that?" "No." "Did Derek say that?" "No." "Okay." She immediately got irritated. "You don't know him." "I know. That's why I'm asking." She started pacing around the kitchen. She said Derek always did things indirectly. He'd act reasonable while quietly setting up a situation where she looked irrational. I believed that could be true. I'd heard enough about their marriage not to dismiss her. But I also noticed something I hadn't before. Rachel wasn't asking me what I thought. She wanted me to agree. There was a difference. She pulled out one printed email where Derek had asked whether he could keep the kids an extra day during Christmas break. "What do you see there?" she asked. I read it again. "I see him asking for Monday." "No. Look at how he worded it." I looked again. Still Monday. I told her that. She got frustrated and said this was exactly how he fooled people. I asked what her lawyer thought. Her lawyer had apparently told her to agree to the extra day if it didn't interfere with plans. That did not help Rachel's mood. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "Mom gets it." I asked what that meant. Rachel had already shown my mother the messages. Mom had told her she should trust her instincts. I leaned back in the chair. That explained a lot. My mother had gone from 10 years of having no access to her daughter to trying desperately not to lose her again. If Rachel said the sky was green, Mom probably would have started shopping for green umbrellas. I told Rachel she needed to be careful about pulling Mom into the divorce. She snapped, "She's my mother." "I know. Then why shouldn't I talk to her?" "You can, but she's terrified of upsetting you." That made Rachel stop. I told her about Mom canceling her plans. Rachel immediately got defensive. "I didn't ask her to cancel." "You didn't have to. She offered. After you said, 'I should have known.'" Rachel stared at me. Then she asked whether Dad had complained about her. I said that wasn't the point. "Of course he did." "Rachel, he still thinks I'm selfish." "I think you're being a little unfair right now." There was a long silence. Then she said, "You all act like I came back because I needed free babysitting." I hadn't said anything close to that. I told her so. She folded her arms. "You're thinking it." "No. I'm thinking everybody's trying so hard not to lose you again that we're not telling you when you're being difficult." That landed. She turned away from me. For a second, I thought she was going to ask me to leave. Instead, she said, "Maybe I am difficult." It was so unexpected, I didn't answer. She sat down across from me. Then she said, "I don't know how to do this." That was probably the most honest thing she'd said since coming back. Not how to deal with Derek. How to have a family again. Rachel said that for years, she'd imagined what would happen if she ever contacted us. Sometimes she'd picture Mom refusing to speak to her. Sometimes Dad hanging up. Sometimes me telling her I hated her. She'd rehearsed rejection so many times that she didn't know what to do with people saying yes. Every time Mom agreed to watch the kids, Rachel felt relieved, then guilty, then angry that she felt guilty. Every time Dad fixed something in her apartment, part of her appreciated it and another part thought, "Where were you when I needed this 10 years ago?" I said, "You didn't tell him you needed it." "I know." There it was again. but this time she didn't say it defensively. She just looked tired. Then she admitted something else. She'd almost contacted us 6 years earlier. Noah had been an infant. Derek had lost his job, and they were behind on rent. Rachel found my old college email address and wrote me a message. She never sent it. I asked why. She said she read it the next morning and felt humiliated, so she deleted it. That bothered me more than I expected. Not because she hadn't asked for money, because for years I'd assumed she didn't think about us. Apparently she had. She'd just kept choosing silence. I asked if she regretted that. All the time. That was the first time she'd said it without adding something about our parents afterward. No explanation. No defense. Just regret. I stayed for another hour. We didn't solve anything with Derek. I told her to listen to her attorney and document anything genuinely concerning, instead of trying to decode hidden meanings in routine emails. She called me annoying. I said it ran in the family. Before I left, she asked if I'd talk to Mom, not to take her side. Just to tell Mom she didn't need to say yes every time Rachel asked for something. I said Rachel should tell her herself. She didn't like that answer. But 2 days later, she did. Mom called me afterward. Apparently, Rachel apologized for the guilt trip over the babysitting. Mom cried, because that's basically her hobby now. Then Mom admitted she'd been afraid that saying no would make Rachel disappear again. Rachel told her, "I'm not going anywhere." When Dad told me that part later, he got quiet for a second. Then he said, "We'll see." I understood what he meant. Trust doesn't come back because somebody announces it. It comes back through boring things. Showing up when you said you would. Answering the phone. Not turning one bad conversation into 6 months of silence. Remembering birthdays? Apologizing without keeping score. Rachel has actually been doing those things. Not perfectly. Neither have we. Last month, she and Dad had another argument. Something stupid about Derek wanting to attend Lily's school event. Dad said Rachel should ignore him and just go. Rachel told Dad he didn't understand. Dad said, "You're right. I don't." Apparently, that stopped both of them. A few years ago, Dad would have followed that sentence with 10 reasons he actually understood better than everybody else. Age has improved him. Or exhausted him, could be either. Rachel went to the event. Derek was there. Nothing happened. A week later, she admitted she'd spent 3 days preparing for a confrontation that never came. I asked if she'd told her therapist that. Yes. Therapist. That was another surprise. Rachel started going a couple months ago. She didn't announce it to anybody. I only found out because I called one afternoon, and she said she'd call back after an appointment. When I asked what kind, she said, "The kind you've all been telling me to make for 10 years. I didn't celebrate. I wanted to." Instead, I said, "Sounds expensive." She laughed. That's sort of where we are now. Megan and I recently got engaged. Rachel was the third person I told after my parents. When I called her, she screamed so loudly, I had to move the phone away from my ear. Then she asked if she could help with anything. I told her she could start by not eloping on my behalf. She said, "One person in this family does that, and suddenly it's a reputation." Mom wants Rachel in the wedding party. Rachel said no. Not because they were fighting. She said she wants to sit with Lily and Noah and just be my sister. I liked that answer more than I expected. Sometimes I think about the night she first stood outside my condo. If I hadn't opened the door, I would have had every right not to. If I'd told her to leave and never come back, I don't think that would have made me cruel. But I'm glad I didn't. That doesn't mean Rachel deserved instant forgiveness. She didn't get it. I'm not sure forgiveness was ever the useful question anyway. There were things she did that hurt us. There were things my parents said that hurt her. Derek hurt her in ways none of us caused. And then Rachel used some of that pain to explain choices that were still hers. All of those things can be true at the same time. I used to think somebody had to eventually win the argument about those 10 missing years. Now I don't think anybody can. They happened. That's about it. Last Sunday, I went to my parents' house for dinner. Rachel was already there with the kids. Mom was cooking. Dad and Noah were in the garage doing something involving a bicycle and way too many tools. Lily was showing Megan pictures on her phone. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen counter stealing pieces of chicken before Mom could put them on the table. I walked past and slapped her hand away. She told me to mind my business. Mom said, "Both of you, stop." Rachel and I looked at each other. Then we started laughing. Mom didn't understand why. She'd said that exact sentence probably 10,000 times when we were kids. For a minute, nothing felt complicated. Not healed, not erased, just ordinary. And after everything that happened, ordinary is probably the best thing we've gotten back.